Okay, today we're going to talk about the principle of mentoring in relation to sailing a boat. 52,000 miles at sea, 8-year holiday. So my name's Tony, and years ago I had the chance to buy a car. Every time I bought a car, when I made the decision, not being an expert car buyer, things would go wrong with the car. When I used my friends to help me buy the car, invariably I got a better run. So that's the principle of using a mentor. When it came time to decide to go sailing, I did some sailing in a hired yacht on the Gippsland Lakes, in Gippsland, Victoria, in South Australia. And that was a very, very flash fiberglass boat. Nothing like I could afford to go sailing, and was the wrong kind of boat to go sailing around the world, which was my dream. So I employed a guy who was buying and selling boats, a yacht broker, to look for boats on my behalf, and I paid him $90 an hour. He would come all the way from where he lived to wherever I found a boat, and he would give me feedback as to what was the best boat to buy. Don't buy this boat, he says. This one, he says, is so small, the movement of the waterline length would mean you'd be tossed around like an apple in a barrel. Your wife would leave you within 5 minutes. That's the wrong boat. Look for something more like this, and he would give me a list of what to look for. So eventually we found this 26-ton steel motor sailor, and the reason that the yacht broker liked the boat was it was full keel. Full keel means it has to push all the water sideways as it gets a rolling motion. So you get press of sail on the wind, and the keel under the water has to push all this water sideways, which makes for a very stable boat in the roll. And being 47 feet on the waterline means it's quite long for the pitching moment. Having a mass of 26 tons also makes a big difference to the feel of a boat if you're going to be a live-aboard boat. So I have a little talk about living aboard a boat, because not everybody can do it. In fact, living aboard a boat as a lifestyle is a little bit like being in jail, and you need to be very, very, very careful about who you have in your space, because in a small space everything that happens is known to everybody else on the boat. In the language of my wife, it's called an utot. In the language of the chocolate factory, it's called a whiz popper. In the language of the Collins Dictionary, it's called a fart, or a slight explosion between the legs of air. Now, if that happens on board a boat, everybody knows about it. You cannot keep any secrets on a boat. Everything is known to every other person, so you must give grace in a small space. We did at one stage take on a guy from Ireland and a New Zealander from a trip from New Zealand to Fiji, in fact Tonga, I'm sorry, and they both wanted off the boat the moment they got there. They decided that 10 days inside a small space was too much for them. So it's not for everybody, but it is a wonderful experience if you can bear with one another and give grace. Now, most people won't go sailing because they're afraid, and it is true that you are responsible as the captain for navigation. Most people think they can't navigate. Navigation with GPS is child's play. The modern maps and sea maps on computer is child's play. All the things that used to make sailing difficult 50 years ago is not the case these days. With depth sounders, radars, radar detectors, really sailing is not that hard. But it is far more difficult to sail coastal than it is to sail offshore. Most people are afraid to sail offshore. They think, what would happen if I got sick? Well, you do have to have a very good medical cabinet, and you do have to have either a Iridium satellite phone or a HF radio, and it does pay to have some confidence regarding what you're going to do in a medical emergency. So coastal sailing has got lots of problems. There's rocks, shallow water, there's fishing buoys, there's trawlers, there's coastal shipping on shipping lines, And then there's the weather, and you're close to a lee shore. So if the weather comes up, generally the water is shallow, less than 300 fathoms, and that means the water feel is more jiggly. Way offshore, when the water goes below 300 fathoms, the swell, the underlying swell, has what we call a sea state on top of it. So if the wind blows up to 30 knots, you get about 2.5 meters of sea on top of the underlying swell. So in the next video, we're going to talk about a trip, the maiden voyage from Hobart to Nelson, New Zealand. We're going to talk about the fantastic places of sailing around southwest Tasmania, the wilderness there, and in Fiordland, New Zealand. So stay tuned for video number 2.